My name is Moriba Jah, and I'm an aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics professor at the University of Texas at Austin, where I lead a transdisciplinary research program in space safety, security, and sustainability. And I've partnered with SpaceWatch.Global to start a new series of web talks, cafes, space cafes called Moriba's VOX POPULI, which is Latin for people's voice. So I hope to see you there. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be candid conversations about all sorts of stuff related to space safety, security, and sustainability. I am a space watcher.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Thursday afternoon in Europe. It's Space Café Moriba's Vox Populi time. This is the 11th episode, and we will begin very shortly. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedbacks. We learn and improve based on your thoughts and suggestions, so please keep interacting with us. I'm Emma, I'm the senior editor of SpaceWatch.Global and the host of Space Café Italy. I'm covering today for Chiara and Thorsten, who are flying back from Portugal and attending the Financial Times meeting in London, respectively. What is SpaceWatch.Global? SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that show their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that, and please keep them coming. You can support us following the supporter program on our website. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast, the newest one featured Bulent Altan, the CEO of Minarik. And if you're a fan of our podcast and radio, please don't forget we publish new episodes every Monday and every Thursday. This morning, we just published a radio episode with Elodie Viau, and on Monday, one with Professor Pascal Herrenfraud. And there are many more coming. They are all just in the backlog waiting for us to produce them. We also have a fan shop. It's on our website, and it's the easiest way to support us actively and become a space watcher. If you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage and on our YouTube page. With that, I think my job is done. And for the moment, I'd like to hand over to our host in Austin, Texas. Moriba, over to you.
Hello, and thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be with everybody again on this next session of Space Café's Moriba's Vox Populi. And so, today we're going to talk about this idea of right of way in space. I keep on telling people that outer space may be infinite, but near Earth space, where we have satellites and these sorts of things, it's finite. We only put things in very specific orbital highways, and you can kind of see them as orbital highways in a sense. And look, I'm looking at the growth of space traffic just in the past couple of years, and I think in the past couple of years, the amount of working satellites has pretty much doubled. I remember when I started getting into this business of space situational awareness back in like 2006, there were like 1,200 working satellites, and now we have about 5,000 of those. And we've pretty much gotten to from like 2,500 of 5,000 just in the past few years. So it's a significant increase in space traffic. That is not going to stop. The United States is launching lots of stuff. Other countries are starting to launch lots of stuff. And there's already friction. There's lots of friction. Very recently, I heard that, China voiced displeasure, let's say, with the Starlink satellites that SpaceX owns and operates. And, not that long ago, China went to the United Nations and put one of these things called a note verbal, in essence, complaining that they tried to communicate with people in the United States about de-risking, deconflicting a potential collision between the Starlinks and their space station. But at the same time, the United States comes back with a response of, based on our evidence, there really wasn't any meaningful risk, which gets us to the point of evidence. When people are making decisions based on their own data, and it's not a shared pool of data, and the opinions that they get from that can be at odds with each other. Somebody can say, this is, and you're acting in a way that is hazardous to me, and somebody says, well, based on my own evidence, not really. What does that mean? And much like, I don't have a private pilot's license, but I can tell you that I was a student pilot when I worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, and I was able to solo and that sort of stuff. And interestingly enough, I went to some rural places where there was no somebody in a control tower. It was just an airfield someplace, and we had some rules. Like if you see air traffic, in the vicinity, these are the things that you do. These are the folks that have the right of way. Where you say, in this situation, this person moves, this person goes first, this person's going to behave this way before I do, and that sort of thing. We see that for air traffic. We see that for regular road traffic, certainly here in the United States, right? And we see that on the seas as well. Interestingly, with stuff on the seas, one of the kind of rules of right of way between two vessels, if one of them is like a sailboat and the other one is a motorized boat, the sailboat, because it's less maneuverable, less agile, has the right of way, and the motorized one is the one that moves. I can say that I'm not a fan of trying to do that for space, because I don't want to incentivize people of just launching stuff that can't move. That's not a great proposition. Given orbital mechanics and where we launch things, that's a recipe for disaster, to just launch things that are not maneuverable or are not agile. Hopefully we'll discuss some of that stuff here. So yeah, I see the increase in traffic. We don't have we don't have common practice. When it comes to space operations, globally as a humanity, we don't have a common practice in space operations. And so having norms of behavior, having some rules related to right of way would be advantageous in trying to achieve increased safety, security, and sustainability in our orbital commons. So I know that was a kind of a long-winded introduction, but hopefully that gives some context. And I want to start by saying I am extremely thankful for my guests today. We have Hjalte Frandsen, who is actually working with me at University of Texas at Austin. He's on a Fulbright visiting researcher fellowship. So we're going to hear from him. We're going to hear from Matt Hejduk, Aerospace Corporation, who knows a thing or two about people trying to come up with these sorts of rules and that sort of stuff. We're going to hear from Ruth Stilwell, who's an excellent space policy person that has a great intersection with the air traffic community, and we're so blessed to have her. And then last but not least, my brother in arms from Canada, Steward, from NorthStar Earth and Space, who is doing some great work as well in this idea of long-term sustainability and space traffic management. So with that, I would like to just open it up to any of you, my guests, for any comments or words that you have regarding this idea of like right of way. Don't rush.
Oh, okay. I'll thrust myself in. This is Matt. I think some would say this is kind of the trivial point or chapter 0, but in order to have right of way, we have to establish between two active payloads, active satellites, who could actually exercise right of way. And to your point, Moriba, I think we do have to think deeply about whether we should continue as a international community to allow satellites to be launched that don't have any capability to actively to control their orbits, or if we do allow it, have a heavily fenced off area, maybe at a very low altitude where elementary schools or hobbyists can put up satellites, since that seems to be something that's of interest to people, but it's in a way that it really doesn't affect the space traffic missions that we've come to rely on. To do that, well, in the presence or absence of such regulations, I do think that it's important, if you're a satellite operator and have experienced some sort of anomaly or having some kind of problem that prevents you from exercising right of way, it's very important to make that known. And there are a number of registries where you can do this, like at spacetrack.org, for example. That's kind of principle zero of right of way. We need to know who can actually exercise right of way and who cannot. And then as a follow-on point to that, there is an issue related to, let's say, national security satellites from any country that are not going to want to say very much about anomalies or about their capabilities. I think here we can't lull ourselves into magical thinking and say, well, they're just going to have to conform to these rules because everybody's going to. I think we have to recognize that there are going to be those situations. There are going to be some countries that are recalcitrant actors, even with their own commercial fleets. And how do we operate when we don't have information, and set up some sort of methodology by which perhaps the satellite that is operating according to the rules that we're going to define here maybe gives notice or issue to satellites where their status is not known. Okay, we intend to take the evasive action. We're going to do this. Please do not maneuver your satellite. It's regrettable that it may come to that, but I think it's important to recognize there are classes of objects that probably will require that sort of exception processing. But anyway, to sum up my initial point, this is fairly low-hanging fruit, to find a way that we can share with other owner-operators what the capabilities of our satellite are and whether they're impaired, so that we know who is on point to perform any right-of-way type activities, should they be necessary.
No, I think that's awesome. And one of the things that I wanted to just kind of bring up with you, Matt, just really quick before we let the others kind of chime in, is that, and I didn't point this out, but it's a very interesting point when it comes to the idea of right of way in space, is that when I'm flying an aircraft, there is no ambiguity about the data and the evidence. It's like when I'm flying an aircraft and I'm in the vicinity of an airfield, I can see other planes and they can see me, sort of thing. When we're on the oceans, kind of same thing, right? It's like the vessels see each other and that sort of stuff. Their evidence is fairly equivalent. On the roads, it's like that as well. In space, not so much, because, right, we don't have ubiquitous data and high resolution video of all the orbital commons and that sort of stuff. So even with everything that you said, the thing that still bugs me is that it's back to the, well, based on my evidence, I don't see what the risk is. And other people are like, well, based on mine, this is an issue. So there still needs to, the pool of evidence by which people are drawing conclusions about risk on orbit is not the same pool of evidence. It's disparate. Everybody has their own thing. So I think that also needs to get resolved, even in the light of the stuff that you said. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that we don't have ubiquitous eyes in space. And so what we infer actually can be very different from each other. So that kind of sucks. But go ahead, Ruth.
If I could build on that a little more, but because you talk about the vessels and the aircraft, but in fact, in order for us to know that they're in distress, they have to share that information. So what Matt was talking about, if you're disabled, if you're impaired, you're now an object in distress. And so there are very specific rules of who has a right of way or who has a giveaway. And an aircraft in distress has priority over all other aircraft. A vessel in distress has priority over all other vessels. But they have to broadcast that distress. And they do that using a guard system using uniform channels that everyone can monitor. So there is a mechanism available to tell everybody in the vicinity, I'm in trouble, so you have to move because I cannot. And so that gets to that information sharing. But I think an important step, and this is a very important step when you're dealing with very, very smart people, because very smart people can come up with all of the barriers and all of the reasons why something can't work. But if we start at the highest level principles, then work on the exceptions after, we can get something moving forward. But if we start with the exceptions, I think that's a real barrier to progress. So can we say an object in distress has priority over all other objects? An object with humans on board has priority over an object that doesn't. An object maneuvering can't create a burden on a stable object. So you can't say, I'm going to move, now you have to get out of my way. Can we get some high level principles that start an agreement process? And that's the most important part, because this is an international environment and we need international agreements. And in order to get those things, we need to involve the governments. And so what is the smallest number of issues that we can get agreement on that starts a process that we can build a set of rules of the road? And if you look to aviation, if you look to maritime, that is how it started. You started with what are the basic fundamental things we can agree on, and we'll worry about dealing with all the exceptions once we have those things in place. But if we don't get those things in place, then we will spend another 10 years arguing about exceptions.
I like that. Steward or Hjalte, anything that you want to?
Well, I really like.
Sorry, Steward, go ahead.
Well, I really like what both folks have said, both Matt and Ruth. I'll just throw a different spin on it, but it sounds a lot, maybe in a different language, to what Ruth has just said. I think about it as the sort of the Stanislavski technique for space navigation. Stanislavski is the guy that created the acting method for performing, where the actor starts out by saying, what's my motivation? We have to assess what is the motivation of anybody to take a corrective action in space. If you don't, that's ground zero for me. So trying to pick up on what Ruth was saying is, how do we make the number of problems smaller and smaller and smaller? What's my motivation to get out of the way? If we can't agree on your motivation to get out of the way, then we better keep working. What's your motivation? We're all motivated to keep space usable. We're all motivated to keep it clean. Okay, maybe you have a satellite that you're trying to do something, covert with, and you didn't want everybody to know, but now you're in distress and you got to let people know. But what's the motivation? Not to clutter the space up any further. That's my motivation. And so if that's your motivation, now you're going to do things and make decisions that help support that. And if you're doing that and everyone's doing that, now, do you really need regulatory? Yes, to a certain degree, but you have commercial services that can provide, the old adage of, my chief commercial officer is an ex-military pilot. The first rule of flying is see and avoid. See and avoid. Everybody has to do it in that order, see and avoid. And you just brought up, Moriba, we can't see that well. So that's a problem, but we can work on that. But see and avoid, and not I see and I don't avoid, you see and avoid me. So this whole concept of who has to get out of each other's way. I mean, we all know that pedestrians have the right of way on the road. Have you ever heard of a pedestrian getting hit by a car as they stepped off the curb? Yeah.
But this is an important point, Stewart. We all know that here, but in the Netherlands, bicycles have the right of way over people. So we can't assume that we all agree on where the priority is until we've had those discussions.
Fair enough. I mean, excellent point to the counterpoint that we're used to pedestrians have the right of way. That's a rule we all understand, but it's not the global rule. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it from the other side. We have to have that perspective of I go back to the motivation thing to sum up. What's the motivation to not have a collision? If I lose access to space, if I make this orbit more cluttered that I'm already in, and maybe I got another one coming behind me, why would I want to make this cluttered? Why? I don't want that. So I'm motivated to find ways to avoid collision. I'll relinquish the floor.
No, look, I love that, man. And I love that you brought it down to earth, so to speak, with the motivation. And that is a critical point. Like if we can't agree on what's motivating us to get out of the way, then we should stay on that topic for a while. So I love that, Steward. Thank you very much. Hjalte.
Yeah, so actually maybe building on that, the motivation for getting a right of way, so to speak, to me there's at least like two big clumps. So that's like the coordination issue, which is the safety issue. Basically, if we know some basic right of way rules, then we can also better predict what other actors will do. So that just creates value for everybody, knowing that, you know, if we meet, I go right, you go left. Then we can easier predict the environment, and we just get less collisions. So that's the kind of rules where everybody just get value. But there's also, of course, another element of wide array rules. That's like, we could call it distribution of cost or right to priority. So it's not necessarily win-win. There's also about someone who gets to keep their orbit and not spend fuel on maneuvering, who gets to not disturb their mission, and who has to potentially lose important mission time. So maybe back to Ruth's point about starting on the simple thing. There is it's easier to solve the coordination part of it because everybody wins. We would all like to have better data about each other. And in a way, right-of-way rules can be a shortcut to data because suddenly you can predict the actions of others if you can assume that they follow at least this basic principle. If I know I'm a space station, everybody will get out of the way. I will not necessarily start moving or planning to move, etc. So yeah, so that, of course, getting some of those basic rules, as you mentioned, with human life and objects in distress, we all can agree on. But then next step would also be to consider where is the coordination issue where everybody wins, and where is this more difficult question where you also have basically a distribution of cost, and that might be something we will get further down the road. I know, Moriba, for example, we have discussed how could we implement something like a footprint, like the space sustainability rating, something like that. Could that be something that would give you priority in certain situations? And that would be lovely to give us incentive to be sustainable in our actions. But that's further down the road. That's a very complicated rule. You would have to agree on a lot of metrics and a lot of ways to measure stuff. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reason in starting with these simple rules, as basic as possible, basically, to get something established and then build on that.
In the audience, how about bringing on Cynthia, who I believe has a question.
Cynthia should be allowed to talk now. Cynthia, you should be able to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I didn't mean to. Sorry.
There.
Cynthia.
Yes.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
You know, it's a beautiful day outside here. You can see the sunlight coming in behind me. So yeah, and we're talking about, I don't know, orbital right of way kind of stuff. So you're on the spotlight. You're part of our group dialogue here. So I see you have a question. What's up?
Yeah. So my question is about China. The other people may not know, Ruth might or might not, that I'm working on a book for teenagers on space law and technologies, and with a co-author who's a science writer for kids. And she and I are in conversation about the extent to which China can be negotiated with over these or any other issues, the extent to which China poses a potential military threat, to what extent might China become aggressive Bill Nelson has recently said he wishes that we could partner with China. So I would love this group's take on the chances for that, or how it might come about, or not, whatever you think. So thank you.
No, I think that's awesome. I can tell you my opinions really quick, and then open it up to the rest of our guests here, Cynthia. But so, and this is going to be a bit of a long-winded answer, but we've got time to unpack some of these things, and we're all about having uncomfortable conversations in this whole Moriba's VOX Populi thing. So I think that we definitely, the United States, right, see potential adversaries in space. China and Russia are part of that group, but they see the United States in similar ways. At least some parts of the US government do. And it's not to say that that is a flawed or mistaken assumption, because there's no domain of human activity that is absent malicious behavior. None. We shouldn't think that space is any different. That said, I'm going to go back to what Stewart brought up, motivation. Even if you have the intent, opportunity, and capability to cause harm, there is this notion, and forgive me for being very crude here, of urinating in your own drinking glass that you want to kind of avoid doing. And so there's a motivation to keep space clean, not clutter it up. And I think because of this, China wants to use the orbital commons as much as anybody else does. There's a motivation that means that there is a way, I think, to engage China so that we can have common practices that lead to long-term sustainability, including the ideas of orbital right-of-way. I've heard conversations about technological surprise, people in the US wanting to invest in that sort of stuff, and it's mostly like a military term, and wanting to avoid being technologically surprised with our adversaries. And you brought up China, so I'll bring that up. And I will say that surprise, I define surprise as the difference between what you observe and what you predict. If you're able to predict the truth, then you live in a very unsurprising universe because you already know it and you're yawning your way through life. But what you definitely want to avoid is believing something about an adversary and then being wrong about it, very wrong about it, right? So that's the desire to avoid that sort of surprise. And there is another way to avoid surprise, and it's being confirmation biased. It means not paying attention to the evidence that tells you that your belief is flawed. With China, I feel that we don't see China as our equals. We don't meet them at the round table. We don't take into account their cultural sensitivities and nuances. And because of that, I think that becomes the barrier to achieving what it is that you're talking about. I think if we recognize that China is extremely competent and very technologically advanced, very capable of many things, culturally distant from us in the United States, but technologically close to us, and treat them with equity, I think a lot of good could come from something like that. But that's my opinion. So I'd love to hear from other people here if they have opinions.
Yeah, I have on that as well, because it always comes up. People say, well, China will never agree, Russia will never agree. But what's our basis for that assumption? They're full participants in civil aviation and international law and the right of way there. They're full participants in maritime. Are there activities that get into dispute? Yes, but is it on the foundational rules? we get in disputes over water rights and fishing rights, but not on whether or not you avoid crashing into another ship. So where we see the full participation in other domains, why wouldn't we expect that same level of participation in the space domain? So I think that there's a lot of sort of throwing up walls that maybe we don't have. And the first thing I would always look to when asking this question is, how do they participate in other regimes? And if that participation is as fully as it is, why wouldn't it be in space?
I think we should all take
A note also is for these rules to work is they often it often depends on you having similar interests. So for example, that China is now having permanent astronauts in Leo on their space station. That means they will have a even stronger aligned interest with the US and others to have a safer domain. So I think technological development and the very strong Chinese space development is actually on our side, on the side of the rules, because when they build up the infrastructure, when they build up the capabilities, they're gonna have more interest in having rules. Basically, the more stuff you have in space, the more valuable right-of-way rules will be to you. So yeah, that's that.
Steward.
Well, I think we should all take a pause on Ruth's perspective. I get a lot out of what you just said. So it's what you did, to say it back in a different way, is you looked for the islands of success rather than the sea of insanity. It's like there are islands of success, and there are, or as in the Princess Bride, the cliffs of insanity. We're not going to go to the cliffs of insanity. We're going to go to the islands of success. But the person who asked the question, I think it was Christina, she asked a very specific question, because words matter. She said, or I understood her to say, how can we negotiate with China? Okay, so how can I go swimming with somebody from China? How can I have an ice cream with somebody from China? How can I negotiate with China? Okay, negotiation for me in this context must be win-win. It must be win-win going in. It must involve, for me, and there may be better ways of describing it, it's not about a standard negotiation where I'm selling something to somebody and I'm negotiating. No. This is a win-win negotiation that must be honest, transparent, mutually respectful, and there must be trust. Okay, if you don't have those four things, you cannot negotiate with anyone. So, Moriba, you spoke to it. Where is the lack of any one of those elements going into a negotiation from either side? But I think the solution comes from Ruth's perspective. It's philosophical. We're looking for an island of success. We're not looking for the cliffs of insanity. So let's go for the island of success and say the motivation for the Chinese is the same motivation as the Canadian, as the Japanese, as the Norwegian, as anyone else. We're motivated to find an answer that's win-win because we all want to use space. And let's remember one thing, just to do a plug for me. The ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, is located 200 meters from my office in Montreal. There is a place in the world where every country agrees this is how we will fly in aircraft in the sky. And we all agree, and we all use the sky for a lot of interesting things. And so we can do the same for space. That's an island of success. It's a metric of success. And I think, General Shaw wrote papers on this years ago from the US. John Shaw wrote papers on using the maritime model as the model for space. It is the infinite sea. It is the eternal sea. It is a great model. So I think there are islands that we can use when we go into this very carefully orchestrated negotiation.
I love that.
Let me maybe provide a final, not a counterpoint, but an adjunct to that, because I agree with all of those comments. Often cooperation is impaired by rather small items that have huge emotional weight. South Korea and Japan, their relationships are encumbered by this question of what really happened during the Second World War and how women were treated during that time. And it's an important question. It could seem small in the context of a security arrangement they need to negotiate, but it's a continuous sticking point. I think the same sort of thing may be in play here. The question is, why does China not want to post ephemerides for their space station? I think the answer might be because they don't want to post it on spacetrack.org, the US website. What if we had a neutrally positioned repository where this information is exchanged in Switzerland or some other neutral country that isn't part of this geopolitical chess match in the same way? That might get us past some of these frictional irritants at the front and really allow the motivations that everyone else has spoken of here so eloquently to come forward. So I'm cautiously optimistic that, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, but I think if we could efface some of these smaller items that have an emotional weight and seem to imply a hierarchy, then we might be able to move very quickly toward these islands of agreement that have been pointed out by the other commentators.
I love that. And Steward, I know you have something to say.
I was just going to say that if you're looking for a neutral country, I was doing a promotion for Canada there when I put my.
Well, right, exactly, man. That's what I figured. That's what I figured you're going to say, brother.
We don't do a lot of things really well. We do neutral well. So there you go. You don't get the same drive. You don't get the same reverse. You just got neutral. But anyway, we do neutral. Okay.
I love that.
Thank you, everybody. I really, really appreciate this. I've been taking notes. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Excellent, Cynthia.
Yeah, I think Matt's point is very, very important. If the perception is the United States is requiring countries with which it may have an adverse relationship to report to them, to answer to them, that is a barrier that will last a long time. And as much as I adore Canada and enjoyed my time there, maybe even hosted by a country that isn't spacefaring, that is completely out of the space equation, might be the approach forward for a shared neutral information system. These things have to be looked at. Matt is dead on that this perception could be creating a barrier that is completely unintended. Yeah.
Let me let's bring up things, Cynthia. We want a signed copy of your book when it comes out. Let's get Nicholas.
Forget it.
Nick, yes, thank you. Nicholas has a bunch of questions. So Nicholas, I don't want you to go through the barrage, but kind of pick one that you feel a bit giddy about.
I couldn't help it. Sorry.
You don't have to apologize to me, man. Go ahead. What's up?
It's just coming out from me. My enthusiasm for space.
I love that. Yeah.
To an extent that I just can't help myself.
I love it. I'm celebrating with you. Yeah.
I'm 74. I also have some other issues that I cannot help myself, but I don't want to predict. But anyway, that's another issue.
Look, I love this. This is the thing that I love about this kind of webcast thing, right? Is that we do this stuff live and you never know what you're going to get. So I appreciate you. You said 74. Love it, man.
In October.
Yes.
In October. Okay, that's right.
Okay. So go ahead and ask a question. What would you like to ask?
All right. Well, the main thing is my first question was, in my mind, the United Nations supposed to kind of rule over more or less in a harmonious fashion, which unfortunately doesn't happen. That doesn't mean that on an object such as this couldn't be agreement between all countries, including Zimbabwe and North Korea. So that's my first thing. How come the UN doesn't have an agency which looks at creating and putting in place regulations for space, such as the aviation industry? They have the maritime, they have nuclear production. All of the countries, they do have agencies. They have to report if there's an accident and so on. That's my first.
All right. So let's see. Any of my guests have any responses to Nicholas on that? I mean, one of the things that I can tell you, I'm going to give them some time to think, is peaceful uses of outer space. You know, there is the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. In fact, they're meeting right now in Vienna. Actually, here they're having meetings in Vienna, and they're very much focused on long-term sustainability of the space environment. And very recently, past couple of years, 93 countries agreed by consensus to 21 guidelines, which, if implemented, would lead towards long-term sustainability. So I think what you're bringing up, there's already a semblance of that that's been germinating and finding its way into the light sort of thing. And I suspect that countries will continue to rally behind those activities at UN COPOS to try to achieve many of the things that we're talking about.
Well,
So
another question which is tied into this, isn't there an international association such as the aviation between all national space agencies? That unbelievable how many countries they have space agencies. Even Greece has a space agency.
yeah, I know. Yeah, so we don't have the Starfleet Federation, my brother.
So
we don't have that.
Isn't such a thing where all these things can discuss? They sit down once a month or maybe once a week, probably would be better, and look at all these things. I would think that can bring to the UN, and then if they do that, then the UN would have no choice but follow suit and come in with some regulations.
Well,
I cannot comprehend that there's no such a thing.
Yeah, understood, Nicholas. So it looks like Stewart wants to say something.
I raised my hand and I'll use the analogy, mano de Dio. We're not looking for the hand of God here. That's where I feel the conversation is going. It's not the hand of God that's going to.
Let's talk about God.
Well, I mean, there isn't one ruling body that's going to take care of all of this. It's not the concept that I'm getting from your discussion, not to be confrontational, but to pick up on the choice of words, is that, you said, isn't the UN, supposed to rule over this? I don't think anybody rules over this.
I didn't say rule. I meant have regulations, such in everything, like traffic regulations we have. The US is on the forefront of regulations, even environmental regulations. Medical, we have to have the regulations based on science and technology, not politics.
I quickly switch back to, let's talk about it philosophically, not in terms of rules and regulations. The UN, I like the way they even worded it. It's the 21 guidelines for the sustainability of space. If you care about the outcome, these are the guidelines, and you're relying on the participating members to behave accordingly. Back to my original comment of what's the motivation?
There are UN forces, there are UN forces involved, including Canada, involved in peacekeeping. There were NATO forces bombing Serbia. I question the reason, although Serbia had a lot of bad things that were happening. And now this force wasn't there when Ukraine was invaded. So there are examples when the UN was able to take concrete measures.
Yeah, and so I think that you do bring up interesting examples, but we may be comparing apples to oranges here. And with that said, Nicholas, there's other people that want to ask some questions, so I'm going to thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, brother. So with that, I see that Mark Meyer had a question. Can we bring Mark on board?
Hi.
What's up? How's it going?
Yes, I'm sitting here in Düsseldorf. I'm wondering why is it not possible to bring all the long-time sustainable ideas in national space law, because that's the base of it all, because we started with the jurisdiction and control of the states, and so we need a regulation which give a permission by the registration. And I think this is a point where we can stuck on, where we have to push the national states to combine with the Outer Space Treaty and the LTS guidelines and all this stuff, because they have to rule their national space activities. And I think this is the way we can do it, but also in a international law way. But to begin, I think it's the best to start everybody with its own state. So thanks.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And my guess is that, especially now in Vienna, they're probably talking about how all the countries that signed the LTS guidelines are actually implementing them in their own countries. So I think people are moving along the path that you just brought up. But yeah, Hjalte.
Yeah, that's just a note between the difference between an environmental standard and a traffic standard. So for the long-term sustainability guidelines, any national measure you can take to limit the amount of debris that your national industry produces helps. However, you can make a perfect traffic regulation if you, for example, I'm from Denmark. If we're Denmark and they make a traffic regulation for our satellites, but that's actually not helping in any significant way, because in traffic it's a coordination issue. So you need to have the same rules for them to work. That does not apply for debris mitigation. As long as we create less debris for the ignition and burn up our satellites when we're done, you can do it in any way. The result is good. But for traffic, we actually need international cooperation. You need a threshold of participants for any traffic rule to make sense at all, to provide this predictability that we want, the ability to know what the other actors will do. So this is really a case where we need to talk to each other about how we do it. We cannot just align the goals, we actually need to align the means of achieving this. And I think back to quickly to Niklas's point about can the agencies speak to each other, and I think they are doing. Actually, the first debris guidelines came from inter-agency cooperation, right? But for this, we're looking into a future where most of the new traffic is actually from private entities, specifically SpaceX, but I think there are going to be more different private actors. So to me, it would be very valuable to get them into the conversation and have them say, hey, what makes sense for them? Because traffic rules need to be efficient from their perspective as well. So I would love to have more industry coming out and saying this is how we would like right of way rules to look and have that conversation going. Nice.
I unless anybody's like chomping at the bit to say something, I want to bring Martin. Martin has a barrage of very enthusiastic for sure. Martin. Thanks, Mark, by the way. Martin, can you hear me? Let's give Martin. Yep. I saw that you unmuted, but for whatever reason, can't hear you. So while Martin tries to figure out the audio thing, one of the things that I've been thinking about, right, is what are things that we want to incentivize with the whole right of way kind of thing. And and I've talked to Matt about this separately, but if people, can we bake sustainability into the right-of-way thing in such a way, like if you're transparent and very predictable and provide evidence whereby people can hold you accountable for your behavior, should that be rewarded with a right-of-way? Just like people file flight plans. If I say, here's my constellation, this is where all my stuff is going to be for the next 4 weeks, plus or minus blank. Like if you put all that stuff out there, make it widely accessible, there are no barriers to get that information for anybody across the globe. I think that would be a pretty cool thing to reward with. You don't have to move because you've already basically said this is where you're going to be. You've been very transparent, very predictable, that sort of stuff. So I'd be very curious to see what other people here think about such a thing.
Well, I feel like you teed this one up for me, Moriba, so let me start. And I'm very interested in Ruth's response to this. As kind of, Moriba and I, together working on this problem and working it separately and with others, one of the key questions that keeps arising is, do we have to have a clear and fully transparent sense of equity in whatever rules we do put together? Because there's often a technological or astrodynamic penalty to that. We can't globally optimize solutions for this that would reduce the overall level of mitigation actions or the overall spending of fuel. Probably won't reduce it uniformly for everybody, but certain actors, certain regimes are going to end up bearing more than their fair share, if fair share is just simply the total divided by the number of actors. And that's led us to think about quasi-optimal solutions, yet that are very simple and transparent. So one of the things I like about what you're proposing is you have this list of space sustainability guidelines, and that becomes the rubric by which right-of-way is determined, at least for some cases. It's transparent, it gives the proper motivations. It also takes us conceptually further from kind of the basics of conjunction assessment, which isn't necessarily bad, but a lot of times, most of the time, the penalties paid by those engaged in conjunctions, those are determined highly by the actual geometry and astrodynamics of the conjunction, which are not always predictable in advance. So we're taking kind of a global statement of sustainability and using that to adjudicate these individual situations. And it's not going to be optimal. I think it's probably highly unlikely we could get to an optimal solution that way. So I'm kind of responding to the question with a question, but I'm interested in how the panel thinks about, do we think in order for these to be adopted, they need to be very simple and make clear that it's completely equitable, even though that's going to create a less optimal solution for the entire enterprise?
I love that. Yeah.
I have some thoughts on that. And so if incentives and equity, it's a very complex discussion. And incentives are even a more difficult level to reach agreement than on like that fundamental safety question. So if you start first with safety, and that's our sustainability issue. If we have safer space, we have fewer collisions, we have less debris, we have a more sustainable environment. If you start to get into incentives, then you really need some strong agreements on what those incentives are, which ones are appropriate. Do you incentivize one country more than another, one type of industry more than another? That becomes a very, very complex debate. But if you look at sort of the organization, and anytime you have increasing congestion, you need increasing organization to manage it. That's why we have traffic lights and painted spaces for parking and people to direct it in high capacity events, is to get the most value out of the space that you have available. So the big incentive is, if we can share greater information and have more information about both where objects are and their intent, which is a very important part of it, then we can put more activity in the same space and reduce the likelihood that somebody has to maneuver. Because if you have greater fidelity for your decision making, your risk of maneuver goes down. That's a, kind of a basic safety equation. The more you know, the better your decisions are. And so if we look at it in terms of that incentive of sharing information actually reduces the likelihood that you'll have a collision. But more importantly, and this is a big one, because this is where we can start to put money to the question. We are not asking you to share information for the sake of sharing information. The better information we have about the position, trajectory, and intent of objects in space, the fewer analysis we have to do on potential conjunctions. And there is an enormous cost to the industry that I am not sure is fully measured of evaluating conjunction alerts that do not result in a maneuver. So if you start to look at what is the delta between alerts and maneuvers, you can measure the cost that we've imposed on the industry, because anytime it doesn't result in a maneuver, it is potentially a false alert, which means you had to invest money and time and resources into evaluating that conjunction. If that money can then be transferred into the cost of transparency, I think you have a very positive business case for participating more, providing information. And that's not just a commercial business case. That's a business case for defense industries, for security industries, because everybody is spending that money now. And if we can transfer that money into systems that provide greater transparency and more precise information, we have a benefit for everybody. Now, then you get in the incentive side. Do people want to participate in something that everyone benefits from? Just like you can't only pollute your part of the space. If you increase the capacity of space, there are people who would argue that that is also problematic because you incentivize more participation and potentially more pollution of the environment. So as soon as you pull one thread to find a solution, you're going to find some downstream things. So that goes back to my first statement. Start with the easy things and see what you can get accomplished there before you get into the highly complex issues. And I think information sharing is one of the low-hanging fruits that we talk about.
I find, yeah, really, really great points. Clearly, people are churning. You've provided some food that makes the brain churn, so that's great, Ruth, as usually do. Does anybody else have something given what Ruth said, or should I try to bring one more person while you think? Go ahead, Hjalte.
A quick note. Yeah, so maybe there's also some kind of get the ball rolling effect with this. For example, if we get some very basic right-of-way rules, then we can certainly also start to actually assign fault when we have collision, if it's one of the cases where these rules apply. And suddenly maybe the whole liability convention becomes much more useful than it might be today. So it gets teeth, but then if we start to have cases, then we might also see development of principle, because yeah, that's something in my experience, law tend to do. When they start having something, then you start making principles to maybe expand on what you already have. So just getting the ball rolling, I think, could be useful. Then we get a standard of care suddenly, like the minimum you need to follow at least these simple rules, and that standard of care again might in the future create even more principles through case law. Because that's also a problem for us. We don't have any case law on decisions on traffic incidents in space, right? That would be interesting.
Nice. Let's see if there's anything else that somebody here. I guess yeah, somebody already answered the whole blockchain thing. So I'm gonna kind of leave that alone. Yeah, so I think we've said a lot of stuff. We've already been on here for about an hour. So I think one of the things that I'd like to do is, yes, why don't we, and respecting people's time, why don't we just go with some closing statements? Let's start with Steward.
Learned a lot today, listening to everybody's perspective. So it's been a pleasure to be on the panel and hear what other people had to say. It's a conversation I'd like to continue. I liked a lot of things that were said, particularly at the end when we talked, when Ruth was talking about a sort of a cycle of finding value in the information chain and using that to incentivize people and also to create funds that would potentially support a system that could deliver that. I've never heard of a model like that, quite like that before. So that just gives me a lot of food for thought. And thanks for having me on. It's been a real
Much love and aloha. Ruth.
Yeah, I like the way how they put it, get the ball rolling. And so that would be my closing statements. First, I think this format is really good. It's an open discussion instead of just presentations, one after another, so we can really bounce ideas off each other. But yeah, identify the smallest point of agreement. And once we get that agreement, we have then a structure to reach agreement. And that gets the ball rolling. So I would just say thanks, Hjalte, for that that quick synopsis.
Nice. Thank you, Ruth. Dr. Hejduk.
No, I think this has been great. And we need more of these quasi-formal. It was pointed out, we either listening to presentations or we have something that's in the bar somewhere. And this is a great via media, since we seem to be using Latin phrases in this particular venue. One thing I'd like to do is find a way, and it's probably not in a form like this necessarily, but where here we've had this great intersection of policy and astro. I'd like to come away at some point with what analytical products do you think need to be put together so that both policymakers and participants have the information in hand to dispose them to enter into agreements of this type, because that's what we in the analytical community are poised to. That's our forte, but we don't interact often enough with diverse groups like this to get a sense of what those products are, because there are policy, there are psychological overlays, etc. We tend to think this is all kind of scientifically run, which in a way it is, but ultimately it's not. And therefore, how can we best support the human element of what's needed to actually move us forward on this? That's something I'd love the help of groups like this, so I can take it back to my particular industry and help shape our priorities.
I think that's excellent. And to your point, I think that's one of Hjalte's missions as he's doing the work that he's been doing with me at UT and that sort of stuff. So I'm sure he's taken note of that, and we'll follow up with you on that, Matt. So with that, Hjalte, you get to be the caboose, man.
All right. Yeah, I agree very much with what everybody said around here, and I love having the discussion. I would love even more to have the discussion with a lot of operators in the room. I think it would be lovely to get everybody somewhere conference center for 2 days, and then just discuss what is the simple thing we can all agree on. And I think that would actually be a lot. Things to agree on with the very basic things, and then get that out there. We all move for this and this and this, and then we can get the ball rolling. And the other thing is that there's like these two sides. There's the technical problem. There's so much stuff we cannot know. There's so much uncertainty, which kind of sometimes makes it hopeless almost to have rules. And then there's like the principle piece about the fairness. And both things have to be considered. And I don't think we should hold back one of them for the other. I think we should just move on both, and then of course each limits the other, so to speak. But it's better to discuss something and then shoot it down later than not having the conversation. So yeah, more dialogues around this would be awesome. And maybe the last point, I'm doing a lot of interviews right now with operators around this, and there's just this everywhere I talk to operators, there's this frustration about the lack of agreement, and also lack of knowledge actually about what other operators think and how they handle their conjunction. So there's obviously a common interest in having more open discussions around the table.
Thank you so much, Hjalte. thanks to all my guests. And before I hand it back to Emma, I think the thing that we can all agree on is the UN should force everybody to. I'm going to help for that one. Look, this has been awesome. Much love and aloha to everybody. And yeah, I always appreciate all of you, my guests, and all the folks who have attended and chimed in and got the opportunity to join us on stage, as it were. So with that, I want to hand that back to Emma.
Thank you. What a panel, amazing. Thanks everyone, it was fantastic. I love the conversation, I love the format. Thank you for Moriba, thank you Hjalte, thank you Ruth, thank you Steward again. I have to say it's been really engaging to listen to you. It's fantastic to hear so many professionals speaking so freely and sharply and changing a bit the language also and the narrative about certain topics. Really, in a sort of way, enlightening. And I also wrote down this sentence, Island of Success versus Sea of Insanity by Steward. I think I'm going to use it like it's mine, basically. Plagiarism, open plagiarism, just because it's really incredible. And if I can add something from a media perspective, from a communication perspective, hearing you talk, hearing the language that you use, much more peaceful, more cooperational rather than belligerent, is what we want to do, I think. As a media company, we want to give you the tool, guys, to transmit this message and to give the island of success the light that it deserves without sinking in the sea of insanity. So thanks a lot. This was really incredible. I'm really pleased that I've had the chance to follow you. But before we finish for today, please allow me to let you don't miss our outstanding upcoming events. 14th of June, 33 minutes with Jennifer Manner of EcoStar about the Spectrum War. 17th of June, Space Café Scotland with Angela Mattis. 21st of June, 33 minutes with Deganit Paikowski about the concept of the Space Club. 24th, 25th, and 26th, Space Café Germany live from the ELA show. 28th of June, 33 minutes with Graham Turnock about the progress of the ESA accelerators. All events are going to be online on Eventbrite, always free. Please share the words. And as always, we would love to hear from your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily and bi-weekly newsletters. And if you like to treat yourself with something special, please become a Space Watcher today or become a SpaceWatch.Global supporter. Thank a lot for everyone. Thanks Moriba, Ruth, Steward, Matt, and Hjalte for your inspiring talk. Thank to our public and for the participation, so many enthusiasm, so much enthusiasm, so many questions. Thanks again also to the entire team of SpaceWatch.Global behind the scenes for doing this great job week by week, every day. I hope I will see you again. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next week. And in the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. Don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao. Aloha.